Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. This video is about the composite texture in Octane 2023 for Moto. Now, if you don't use Moto, this will still be useful to you. It's just being done in Moto, right? So the nodes are still the same Octane nodes with the same names. If you're using Cinema 4D or Blender or standalone, they're just going to look different in Moto Schematic and probably older and clunkier in Moto Schematic because Moto Schematic needs an update. So let's just continue on. So now, really quickly, one of the best things about Moto or any 3D program is the Moto shader tree. It's just fantastic, and people who don't use it don't really understand it, and they're sort of so used to working with nodes and think they're so great. Moto shader tree is super fast and super flexible, and it's super easy to change things really quickly. You have opacity and transfer modes built in, really easy masking, and it's all super compact on the side. It's awesome. Octane, unfortunately, doesn't really support much of it right now, but from what I understand, they're going to be working on that quite a bit. But what's exciting is all the changes to the composite textures and the ability to do essentially adjustment layers like in Photoshop in Octane 2023. This whole new system seems like it would fit really nicely with the shader tree. Seems like it would work really well. So just first off, there's a couple of concepts I want to show in the shader tree really quickly, and then I'm going to show the sort of analog to those in the composite texture in Octane. So we just add a constant texture here. This is just a color texture. They call it a constant in Moto. They should probably just call it color. So we'll just add like a red. Okay. And I'm actually going to turn this to a Moto preview. So this is Moto. All right. We got red. Let me just hide my flame there. I don't think that's going to work in Moto. And then I'm going to just duplicate my constant and we'll make this like blue. And then if I want to mask in between these, I've got some images here. I can just bring in my little circle here, drag it on top, and then I can do a couple things. I can either change this effect under shader control to a layer mask. You'll see it says layer mask, and then drag it underneath. And then I can just change the wrap here a little bit, just maybe to 4. And so you can see that effect happening. So now this blue is contained within the circle, right? It's contained within that. And I can also, instead of putting it underneath it, I can also drag it on top of it, and you'll see it's just kind of sitting there, and it'll show you that it's a mask, right? So I've got a mask on there. See M equals circle. And so that's really easy to use in Moto. Now I can also do something called a group mask in Moto, which is really cool. So if I add something like a gradient, and we'll just edit this really quickly, like that. Okay, looking good. And then maybe I'll add another constant on top of that. We just duplicate this constant. We'll just make this one like orange, right? So now I've got the orange on the gradient, but I'm going to control click both of these and then control G for group. Now they're both in a group, all right? Nothing's changed here. If I turn them off, they both go off at the same time. Turn it back on, they're both on at the same time. But if I want to mask out both of them at once, I can do what's called a group mask. So I can take my triangle here and click through it at the top. And then again, let me just change the UV wrapping to something like 3. You'll see there's sort of 50% gray and a full white. And so everything in this group will come through in the white and it'll come halfway through in the gray. If I change this, right click, shader control to a group mask. So now I've got the gradient and that other constant circle color within this triangle group mask right here. So I'm masking the entire group, which is pretty cool. And at the end of the day, I can also do essentially an adjustment layer like in Photoshop with the, let's see, it's called the process texture. Now I wish there was a whole bunch of these in Moto. Unfortunately, this is all we have, but I can go in here and I can like change like the hue like that. And it's going to change everything. And now if I just drag this in this group under here, it's only going to change the hue of the stuff being masked off by the group mask, right? So I have a lot of control in Moto. That's just the real basic shader tree primer if you don't use Moto. But this is, all this stuff now is available in Octane for Moto or Octane for anybody. And I'm going to show you how to do that really quickly. So let me just delete all of these. And we'll with those sort of concepts in mind, let's take a look about how you do it in Octane. So we'll change this to an Octane render window, hit render. And then I'm going to add an override to the shader ball, which is this white material here. That's the shader ball mask. Add Octane override. If you're not familiar with Modo, the Octane override is just saying that it's just going to be moving all of this into the schematic, and it's saying all the shading is going to be done in the schematic instead of the shader tree. So here's the schematic, and here it's just put in a glossy material with this white color as the diffuse color for the glossy, right? So let's start, layering stuff up. So let's just change this to like, purple or something like that off the bat. Now, if I unplug this and select my diffuse, and I'm going to have it selected, it'll just auto connect whatever texture I select. And so I'm going to go to new texture, and way down at the bottom, let me just collapse a couple of these guys. Way down at the bottom, you'll see one called Composite Texture. That's the new one. So click Composite Texture. There it is. You'll see it's got a couple layers there. All right, and so you're thinking to yourself like, oh, okay, I'll just plug in my purple here to layer 1. Boom, done, right? We're in business. Nope, it's not that easy, right? So it's fine. Octane just keeps abstracting things into more and more nodes. That's fine. Shader tree is way better, but this is the way it's going to work for now. So we can't plug our textures right into these layers. We have to decide if we're going to have a texture layer or a layer group, or we can plug any of these adjustments like brightness or contrast or exposure, or any of these channel operators like channel mixers into those layers, right? So we want a texture, so I'm going to click texture layer. Now this is where all of our opacity and blend modes and some other controls are existing. So I've got my texture here, and I can just take my purple color, plug it into the input. Now we're in business, right? And so if I want to layer something on that, I can duplicate this, or I can come over here and just say new texture layer. We want a texture on this layer, and for the input, we want a different color. I'm just going to Control deduplicate that. We'll change this to like cyan, plug it into the input, and there we go. Now if I go over here to this node where my opacity and my blend modes are, I can change the opacity, right? Go down to 0. I've got my purple, go back up to 100. I can also change my blend modes, right? So this is a little much maybe, but there's all kinds of blend modes. The ones you recognize from Photoshop are here, like linear light, pin light, hard light, soft light, overlay. The actual useful ones like average and add and multiplier up here. So if I go to multiply, you're going to get something dark, sort of a bluish color, because I'm putting that, multiplying the sign onto the purple. If I turn this to add, it's going to get really bright, right? Okay, so that's how that works. We'll just put it back to normal for now. Okay, so we got blend modes, we got opacity. How do we mask things? Like if I want to bring that circle mask in, where do I put that? Okay, glad you asked. Okay, there's an opacity channel here, so if I select that, and I want to bring in that circle image we had used as a layer mask earlier, I'm going to just come up here to new texture. I'm going to do a grayscale image, which is right here. And then I'm going to come over here to my images. I'm going to drag in my circle and just connect up the file name. Again, like lots of connecting in a schematic, and it's taken up all this room where shader tree it's also it's like super compact and way better. But you already know that if you're a Modo user. Anyway, so let's just change our UV pattern here, or repeat here a little bit. So now, we got the same thing, right? I've got this color right here, and I'm containing it to this mask, this image mask here. Okay, so we're in business, right? So I can add another one. So you see I've only got 2 layers here. If I want to add another one, I can do add input. Now I've got another layer, and I'm just going to scooch these over. And here I'm just going to do like a new texture layer. Let's adjust the hue, because I can do any of these adjustment layers as well. So I'm going to do adjust hue. And I'm going to start changing the hue. Now, typically you think of hue as sort of a 0 to 360 thing, or if it is normalized, 0 to 1. For whatever reason, in Octane, it's negative 180 to 180, whatever. So 180 is like an inverted sort of, and anything in between. There's 90. Here's negative 90, the other direction on the color wheel. But it's changing both of these. What if I only want to change one of these? Well, I could use the same mask. I could actually bring this in here into the opacity, and now this color at the bottom is going to remain unchanged because I'm masking both this color and the adjustment layer, the hue adjustment, with the same mask. But you can actually do some more interesting stuff. You can do like a group mask, sort of pre-comp, in Octane as well. So let me just unplug this hue here. And I'm going to, under layer 2, instead of adding a texture, I'm going to add an entire layer group. And this is basically just like a pre-comp. I can just layer up a whole bunch of textures here and then mask them all out at once, kind of like a group mask in the shader tree, right? So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to say for layer 1, let's do a procedural texture. Let's do like new texture. Let's do oops. Before I do new texture, I've got the layer group, right? I can't plug a texture right into it, just like I can't plug a texture right into this layer. I've got to have the Octane texture node first with all the opacity and transfer modes on there. So let's go to new texture layer, texture, and now I can go to input and I can add my procedural texture. So new procedural texture. By the way, there's a file on the Pixel Fondue Discord where this will be as well. That's one scene in Modo with like every single procedural texture on there. Also all the noises. So it's pretty great for just getting quick visual reference of what all these procedurals do. So I'm going to add the procedural effects texture. It starts with fire, but I actually like this sort of swirly painty thing. Paint colors, yeah, that's the one I like. You can actually adjust the time to like swirl those around a little bit. So something like this. Okay, so we're getting started. So again, I'm just pasting this on top. So it's going over the entire thing here. Now I've got all of my opacity for the entire group here, as well as mix nodes or blend modes for the entire group as well. And I've got them per layer here, right? So there's that one. Let's just add like one more. We'll just do layer 2. Let's new texture layer. We'll do a texture, and then we will on the input. Let's just do new texture, and then do like another procedural effect like this. We'll just keep this one fire. And then I'm going to mask this one. So under opacity, let me just sort of scooch these up and down a little bit. We'll use like a procedural texture for this instead of an image. So I'll just go to new texture and do like raindrops or something like that. Rain bump like this. And I can adjust the size of these guys, maybe like it's a little bit. Like that, and kind of see the rain texture on there. Okay, fine, cool, right? And then we'll just take my hue and we'll add one more layer here with the add input. And then I'll take my hue and drag that into the top there. And now I'm adjusting all of these, right? Now, what I can do is to do this sort of group mask effect, I can just add one to the opacity here of this Octane layer group node, and it'll mask all this stuff at once. So I've got opacity selected. I'm going to do a grayscale image, so new texture, and we'll do grayscale image. And then I will pick one of my images here. Let's do this triangle where it's sort of 50% in the middle and then fully opaque on the edges. I'm just going to drag this in, connect my file name there, and then maybe adjust my scale a little bit. 33%, and there you can see like it's within these triangles. We can do like 25, maybe you can kind of see the triangles now, 20. So sort of 50% in the middle and full on the edge, right? So all of these, all of the textures here, both the paint swirls and the fire, which have their own masks, and the hue adjustment are all masked within this single mask here, acting like a group mask, like I showed earlier. And I can go in here and add another input, and I can select that and do like another effect, like a new texture layer. So it'll take a texture, a layer group, or an effect, or an operator, which lets you run some operations on the channels. So we'll just do like an exposure, and then I can like brighten this up or darken it. So we'll just bump up the exposure of those triangles. You can see it kind of going up, right? Like that. Okay, so hopefully that is all making sense. It's just a few extra steps, right? So first thing you do is you add your composite texture layer node, and then you have to go into here to new texture layer and say we want a texture or a layer group or an effect to, like a layer, like a adjustment layer is what we call them in Photoshop, or one of these operators, right? Now the mask with layer group, I cannot figure out what that does. I can't figure it out. I can't find any documentation. If you figure it out, put it in the comments below, and maybe we'll add to this video or add to this scene on the Modo Discord. Okay, so we've got all this in here, and all the blend modes and opacities are put on these texture layers here. They connect textures to the inputs, right? And you connect masks to the opacity. Great. Okay, let's move on to something just like a practical example of a texture now, right? So I'm going to stop this, and I'm going to select all. Let me just get my images out of here and remove those. I'm just going to delete everything else. I think everything else is just a node. So I'm going to take all those. I'm going to delete them all. Yes. And now we're just back to this. And so, yeah, let's create like a sort of worn denim texture with a colored patch on it using this whole setup. Okay, so I've got some images in here. I've got one for roughness, which I set color space to none. I'm going to use this as a displacement map as well. And I've got this colored denim here. So let's just start with roughness. So I'm just going to go over here to roughness, and I'm going to add a grayscale image really quick. So just new texture, whoops, new texture, and a grayscale image. And then I'll just drag in my roughness image here and plug that in. Boom, like that. And then I'm going to create a new displacement. So we'll go over here and say new displacement. We'll do a texture displacement. Drag this down. And then the texture is going to be the same grayscale image. So I'm just going to scooch that over and plug that in like that. You'll see some displacement there. Notice there's some tearing going on right there. That's where there's a UV scene. So we'll change, first of all, the level of detail to 2K. That's what the map is. And then we'll do follow a smooth normal there like that. So it's going right over there. And yeah, it looks pretty good. I think mid level is 2.5. And so it sort of sucks in and puffs out as well. And so we've got some nice texture there. We just maybe push in 100% so you can see it. And then let's start with our color, right? So now I'm going to start with the composite texture because I'm going to do some layering here, right? So I'm going to say new texture, and then way down at the bottom, you'll see composite texture right there. And if you remember, we've got our layers, right? So I'm going to do layer 1. I'm going to add a new texture layer. We want a texture on that layer 1. And that input is going to be an RGB image. So new texture, RGB image, and this will be our denim image, right? So we'll just scooch these down and get my denim image. I'll just drag that in. Did I drag it in? Like this, and hook up the file name like that. And I think I'm gonna change the UVs on these just a little bit. Let me just maybe make it 75%, so a little bit smaller. And okay, so it looks pretty good. So let's get some worn edges on here. So my sphere actually, if I go to VMap and select this vertex map here, this weight map, I've got a little weight map on the edge of the sphere. So I'm going to use that as an opacity texture. So let me just jump back over to the schematic. And then on layer 2, instead of adding a texture layer, I'm going to add a group. So new texture layer, we're going to do layer group. And I'm just going to sort of scooch this up here. So layer 1 of this group is just going to be just our regular old denim layer that we already used on the bottom. So I'm just going to replug that into layer 1. Nothing changes. I'm just sort of pasting the same thing back on top of it. What I'm going to do is add some adjustment layers here. So I'm going to just add a couple, add another input here. And so for layer 2, I'm going to add, this time, an adjustment instead of a texture. So new texture layer, and let's go to adjust saturation. So the saturation, I am going to turn down to 0. So it's black and white, like that. And then on layer 3, I'm going to do new layer, and I'm going to do exposure. I'm going to then bump this up. And so this is like 5 or something like that. Maybe that's too high, like 3. So this is sort of like a worn texture, right? Sort of like a worn edges on there. And so if I want to isolate this to that weight map, I can then create an opacity, right? Go here to opacity, and I'm just going to add a texture on there. So I want I want new texture, and I want a vertex map. So I think that is a geometric grayscale vertex attribute. And then what you do is you just type in the name, and that's just called weight. You can see it right here. So W-E-I-G-H-G, like that. Now you can see that worn edge is right there. So I want to roughen this up a little bit because that looks just a little too perfect there, right? So instead of actually just plugging this into the opacity, I'm going to unplug that, all right? And opacity, I'm going to use another composite texture. I'm going to layer up some textures for the matte. So you can do that for the matte as well. So new texture, and down at the bottom, composite texture. And then again, I need to do a layer for a new texture layer texture. And then I can plug in my grayscale vertex to that input, right? Boom. So now we're kind of back where we started, but I've got some other layers here that I can mess around with. For layer 2, let's go to new texture layer. We'll just do a texture for this too, all right? And this is going to be on the input, we're going to use a maybe one of the Cinema 4D noises. So new texture, and then under procedural, we do Cinema 4D noise like this. And I think I kind of like the, for the noise, I like the gaseous one. So that's way down here at the bottom. Now, if you want to see what this looks like, sometimes I'll just take this guy and I'm just going to bypass everything. Just hover over this node, and I'm just going to plug it into diffuse here. And then I'm going to grab the roughness and displacement. I'm just going to H for hide to disable them. And here I'm going to be using the Cinema 4D noise there, right? So nothing looks like it's happening. So usually that means the scale is off. So let's just come in here and just sort of scooch these over. Come on, Moto, you can do it. Zoom in and see what we have to look at. First of all, we've got a linear projection for the noise texture. I don't want that. I want UV projection. So select projection, and over here, new projection, mesh UV. And now it's on the UVs. That noise is being mapped to the UVs. And then I can bring it down to like, 10% or something. Whoops, Control Enter to get it, or Control Alt Enter to get on all 3 axes there. Something like this. Maybe even like 6%, like that. So that's what our noise looks like. And we want to multiply this against that edge weight. So let me just go back in here. I'm going to unplug this and plug everything back in. And here we just have our noise just layered on top of the edge weight, right? But we actually want to multiply it on there. So where it's black, where the edge weight is black or nothing, it's 0. And where it's fully white around the ring here, we'll get all that noise. So we'll go over to the noise. And I'm just going to change from mix normal to multiply. And now we just have some noise here around the edges. Sort of now it's like those edges aren't so, it's not just like that. It's more sort of natural looking, right? But we need to like bump this up a little bit. That doesn't quite look right. So let's just add a couple more inputs. So add another input. And on this input, we'll just add the exposure. So a new texture layer. Let's adjust the exposure. Right here, and we'll just bump this up to like 5 or something. Now we're getting a little too much along the edges, so we just sort of back that off. All right, something like this. All right, so we get some nice like bumpy, noisy stuff around the edges there. I'm going to add one more layer here. And here you can see where it's just so nice to have these image processing nodes available to you in Octane. You don't have to like bake something out and like mess around with it in Photoshop or, you know, create a new image or whatever. You just like adjust all this. You just have all these like image processing nodes here at our disposal. And so let's add one more. Let's add a contrast node. So new texture layer. Let's go to contrast. And I'm just going to up the contrast, something like that, to like make it kind of chunky, right? So it's taking that noise and making it kind of chunky. I'll just back it off a little bit. So there, so there's our edge wear, right? It looks a lot better than, maybe a little bit chunkier, a lot better than if I unplug everything. Just that, right? So we take our vertex map, we multiply it against some noise, we bring up the exposure on the noise, and then we use contrast to make it sort of chunky. There we go. Nice, right? So let's say we want another layer. We want sort of this panda to act as a patch right there on our denim. So let me just grab these two guys and press U for unhide and get that roughness and displacement back there. And then let's add another input to our composite texture. I'm just going to sort of scooch it up. And on this one, layer 3, instead of just adding a texture layer, let's do another group. So new texture layer, and we're going to do a group. So let's just do layer group like this. And then for layer 1, again, new texture layer texture. That first layer is going to be a texture. And that texture is going to be an RGB image. So input, new texture, RGB image. It's just so much clicking and noodling around compared to the shader tree, but hopefully, like I said, we'll get that fixed. Okay, I've got my panda in here. Now this is, if I double click on it, it's a ping image with a transparent background. And you may be thinking to yourself, awesome, let me just remove that locator that came in there. Well, it's got a built-in alpha channel, so surely like the shader tree, it's gonna see that and it's just gonna work, right? No, unfortunately it doesn't. If I plug this in, you know, we've got our panda there, but it's not seeing the alpha channel, right? And there's nothing on here. You know, you can mess around with these overlay nodes, but it's not going to see it. So source over is what you want, just source over the underlying background. So it's okay. We've got an opacity channel, you know, right here. So let's just sort of move our input up a little bit. And for our opacity, we want new texture. And we want right here, it's alpha image like that. Okay. And this alpha image, let me just move these up. So here's our color image, this up top, and here's our alpha image. I'm actually going to remove the transform values in the projection because I want them to be the same. So I'm going to take these two. I'm going to take my projection and plug it in here, and my UV transform and plug it in there. So now when I move these, you know, one around the mat, it'll also move the image. And for the file name, I just plug in the same panda. So what this alpha image will do is it'll extract the alpha channel of our panda. So now it seems like it should just be able to do that all at once, but it doesn't. So we have to use the opacity channel here. We have to have an alpha image texture, and then we just plug the same one in. Unless somebody has found a better way to do it. I have not. By the way, there's all these overlay modes. These are actually documented on Otoy's site. Maybe I'll include a link to that. You're honestly not going to use hardly any of these ever except source over. But if you find a use for some other ones, then go for it. I kind of feel like they threw the kitchen sink at here, maybe without really knowing if we needed any of these, but that's fine. Let's adjust our UV offsets though. So let's make it a little bit smaller, like 25% maybe. Let's select both of these images at once and change the wrapping to clamp, right? So we're not going to wrap it. And then grab our transform again, maybe make this a little bit bigger, like 33. And then I'm going to translate the X and Y, which is like the U and V. I'm just going to move this here. And I'm going to then move it down. So we've got a little panda patch on the side. Maybe it's a little too big, so maybe like 28% or something. Okay, so now we want to change the colors. So here's where I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to unplug my matte here, like that. And I'm going to come over here, and on layer 2, I'm going to add a new texture layer. I'm going to add just the hue adjustment. And I'm going to turn that to like -90 or something, so our panda is different. Now, if I had this matte plugged in here, let me just plug it back in. The problem is this hue is adjusting everything underneath it, right? This hue is adjusting everything underneath it, not just the panda. So if I want to limit it to just the panda, instead of using the matte image on the panda texture, I used, remember, a layer group here, so it'll just be like our group mask over in Modo. So I'm going to unplug it from that texture and plug it into the opacity on the entire group. So now it's masking for the panda image. Boom, got it. It's also masking for our adjustments right here, our hue adjustment. So we got that as well. Maybe that looks better. So yeah, there we go. So, you know, this little unwieldy, a lot of stuff going on there. But it's obviously very powerful. What I'd like to see very badly is all of this stuff incorporated in the shader tree, where layers in the shader tree recognize alpha channels of images. That's great. We have blend modes, but we don't have everyone that Octane has, but I guess you could add them. We have opacity, and yeah, pretty cool, right? So hopefully we'll see that, but until we get that, you can wire it up in the schematic. And if you don't use Modo, obviously, that you would do this the same way in standalone or in Blender or whatever, Cinema 4D. And like I said, I'll put this file up for everybody to download. But I do think if they get this stuff integrated into the shader tree and maybe get a non-commercial version of Modo out, or just an indie version, or lower the price, God forbid, that this could be really appealing to a lot of people. One of the problems with Octane is it's super powerful and it has a ton of features. They're not super well documented. There's only a couple of YouTube channels. There's Silverwing and us, and I think New Plastic is a Cinema 4D one, maybe a couple of others that go through and document some of these things for them. But the shader tree is so simple and so great to use. Having the power of Octane in the shader tree, having access to those Octane features in the shader tree I think would be an amazing combination. So that's my pitch.
Yum, yum!